Welcome to the Create Today podcast, where we share stories and strategies to help you create the life you want, no matter what shit you've been through. I'm your host, Karen Stanley, and today's guest is Wendy Sterling. She is a divorce coach, author, speaker, and host of her own podcast called the Divorced Woman's Guide Podcast, and she's awesome. Wendy, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen, for having me. It's an honor to be here today.
Well, we're going to help a lot of people with your story and what you are doing to help thousands of women get through the divorce process and create the life that they really want to lead. That's really what you're doing right every day. You have been for a long time.
Yes.
So I want to back up and I want to ask you about your life before divorce rehab. You were in the corporate world. You were married.
Yes.
What was your corporate job?
I worked in digital ad sales. So I worked for some of the world's top leading feminine lifestyle brands, selling digital advertising experiences, influencer marketing, living that Facebook facade life that everyone on the outside thought was picture perfect.
Right. And of course it wasn't.
No.
I had a therapist tell me once that it's sometimes harder, not that it's a competition or there's one better than the other, but divorce is harder, quote, than the death of a spouse, because the death there's no way you could have done anything to prevent it. You don't have that blame or shame.
Right.
And when you get a divorce, you may be caught in that trap of thinking, I could have, I should have, did I really give it my all? Did you get to a point, or do you remember a specific breaking point where you were sure that you had done everything that you could do to save your marriage?
Yeah, I mean,
Like?
it's a little more dimensional than just that. My ex-husband and I, we had been together since we were 18. So we were together over 23 years, married for 15 at the point in time where I realized that he was having an affair with a female colleague. And before that moment in time, I knew that our marriage was not doing well. We both did, because we were actually in couples therapy. And so in my mind, I was doing everything. I was not only in couples therapy, but I was also in my own individual therapy, working on the aspects of our marriage that I thought were broken. Number one being our inability to communicate and feel seen and heard on both sides. And so for me, I threw myself into this. And ironically, we started couples therapy right after I believe the affairs started. And so for me, when I realized what was going on behind closed doors on his end, it made me question, was he even trying? What was anything I was saying or doing even, like, was it too late? Why was I doing all of this? So for me, there's kind of two parts where I had this kind of reality check for myself, which was when I found out about the affair, it was, but wait a second, I thought we were working on things. Like, I didn't know things were that bad. On the flip side, I was like, wow, how did I miss this? And then, later on when we separated, my whole philosophy is that I don't want to live my life with regrets, which to me means that if 6 months down the road, I'm going to have a question and wonder, what if? Then I didn't do my work to make sure that I already knew the answers to those questions. So the year that we were separated, after me kicking him out and learning what was going on, I spent that time not only figuring out who I was, but I also spent that time trying to understand, is this marriage worth saving? Am I staying for the kids? Is that enough? How are we going to make this work? How are we going to get through this? And so for that year that we were separated, I felt like I was really working through a lot of what my boxes that needed to be checked were. So we were still in couples therapy at that point, switched therapists because clearly the one we had wasn't really working. And then we were both in individual therapy. And so I didn't know what he was doing, and I couldn't, I didn't have any visibility really other than couples therapy, what was going on. And for me, I was doing all of my work. I was doing my due diligence to know that when I would come to a decision, that I felt confident in it and I wouldn't have any regrets. And so, when that time came and we were in that therapist's office and I looked at him, I'm like, it's been a year. Shit or get off the pot. What are we doing? And he was like, I still don't know. And I looked him in the eye and I said, well, I do. And I'm done. I want a divorce. And I looked at our couples therapist and I just said, can I leave now, please? And I walked out of the room. And that was the moment where I knew that I chose myself and I was tired of living this life for him and feeling like I wasn't being authentic, and there was nothing worth saving anymore, that, our relationship had really run its course.
Yes, which is devastating, liberating and devastating. And then you have the year after. What was that year like?
The year after we
actually
separated?
got divorced. Yeah. After you made that decision, then what was it like?
Well, so nothing about my life is easy over here, nor is anybody else's, but there's another layer to the story, which is the day that I looked at my ex-husband and said, I want a divorce. Hours later, my mom was rushed to the hospital and they discovered ovarian cancer. So at first I thought, what the hell's going on? Like, why is this happening to me? Like, the two people who have been my rocks my whole most of my life are now dying, right? Death of a marriage, death of my mom. And so I got to this place where I convinced myself that my ex-husband was going to take me back because my mom was dying. I was convinced for like 3 months after my mom's diagnosis. I was like, oh, there's no way he's gonna get divorced from me with my mom dying. Like, this is totally going to win him back, right? This is where legitimately where my mind went. And while he was extremely flexible with custody and letting me do what I needed to do, because my family and I live in separate locations, not once did it ever dawn on him that I should not do this by myself. And I ended up experiencing this by myself without my husband. And so during that following year, it was me juggling my mom and then also my divorce. And so that year that I spent really, from the day that I said I wanted a divorce, I filed, a couple of months later. And then that next year became a year of a lot of, I'll call it eye-opening information, just bleeding at the seams. I mean, it was just one thing after another, just kept exposing itself. And interestingly, though, everything that kept getting exposed as we moved through our divorce process showed me that I made the right decision. I was gaining power in my voice. I was starting to really realize why we were no longer compatible. I started understanding that I had stopped really living for myself and I was living out of fear of the unknown. So I just stayed in the comfortable autopilot of the life that I had been accustomed to. At the same time, I realized how I had my self-confidence was in the toilet, my low self-esteem and my low self-worth just had me in a place where it was almost like I thought I had been faking it for so long that when I couldn't fake it anymore, it was devastating to realize that I had allowed myself to get that low. I was depressed. I was on medication. I had lost a ton of weight because I couldn't stomach him. I couldn't stomach food. I could barely take care of my two boys that whole time. And so instead of allowing myself to get swallowed by the negative side of divorce, I decided to rise above and to really see that it was time for me to pull on my big girl pants and to start living my life for myself. And so what that looked like for me was quitting my 20-year career that, sure, I was great at my job. I made a great paycheck, but I was miserable. And I had discovered life coaching during that year. I had also discovered energy healing and other modalities of like spiritual psychology that had really helped me to change my mindset. And at the time, I didn't know of any other programs out there that really kind of had this 360 degrees of healing, involved in divorce recovery. And so I decided that that was why this was happening, and that it was happening for me to be the source for women going through divorce. And so I quit my career after I filed for divorce, and I decided to open my business, which is a divorce rehab. And I gave myself 2 years to make the same paycheck and to replace my old, otherwise I was going to go back. Now, keep in mind that I also was under the assumption that we had money in our bank account. And as many of us know, divorce exposes a lot of things that those of us who turn a blind eye to our finances, biggest mistake I ever made and will never do again. So I did all this thinking that there was money in the bank. And so by the time I realized that there wasn't, it was an even bigger fire lit under my tush to really get my business off the ground. And so I've really led with my heart. I've led with my passion that if this happened for me, that I knew that I could help other women to process this and to process it more quickly than it did me. It took me almost 2 years, and now I help women, and it's accelerated. It takes a year. And, to just see how they're able to create amazing, beautiful lives on the other side of divorce is really what drives me, because my mission is to really change this conversation around divorce from shame to empowerment. The stigma gets to shift. And that was my inspiration from day one after filing.
Well, isn't that beautiful? And that's such a great message for everybody who's going through, even if it's not a divorce, some kind of, massive tragedy or breakup, transition. All of them are very tricky and hard to navigate. And there's a lot of shame. What is the one thing that helped you step away out of the shame and the depression? What are the things that helped you the most, that gave you that inspiration to teach that to others?
Honestly, it was really around my faith, and call that whatever you guys want, whether that's a belief in God, the power of the universe. To me at the time, it was the power of the universe. It was, I knew that this was happening for me. There had to be a reason. And so for me,
how did you know that? How did you get to that place? A lot of people can't even get there.
Because I had been taught my whole life to look at things from a glass half empty. And that is really, pity party, victim mindset was really where I had been. And it wasn't working. Nothing was working that I was doing in that frame of mind. And so the moment that I stepped outside of that and took responsibility for how I had gotten to where I was, and I shifted to a glass half full, everything in my life started changing. And so I started to eventually see how, when my mindset went from lack to abundance, right, that everything around me started to change. I was talking to a client earlier today, and, she's heading into mediation, and she's very worried about, what she's going to wind up with. And, it reminded me of a story that I shared with her, and I'll share with your listeners, which is that when my lawyer and I were heading into our negotiations with my ex about our divorce settlement, she's like, okay, let's put together like a good, a better and a best. And I said, no, best. And she's like, no, good, better, best. I'm like, best. I'm like, I'm not even entertaining these other two ideas. Like, there is a best, and that is what I'm walking away from this marriage with. And she's like, are you sure? I'm like, best. And that when we laid all that out, and I'm talking getting really crystal clear on the amount of money I wanted, the assets that I wanted, custody, all of it, like specifically laid out on a piece of paper. And I was like, that's what we're going to walk away with. And she's like, lawyers, right? I just want to, really expectations. Da, da, da. I'm like, la, 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 don't care. Like, this is what I'm getting. And that is what I focused on. And so what I learned from the beginning was that when I set my mind to something, right, our minds are very powerful, that when we act from a place of that's already done, guess what follows? And I have not stopped doing that since. And so, it took time. It took hiring a coach. It took really working on my mindset. It took working on my spirituality. It took working on untraining decades worth of behaviors and beliefs for me to shift into that. And what motivated me was the way I was thinking wasn't getting me anywhere. It wasn't getting me to the life that I wanted. And nobody can change that except for me. But yet, when we go through divorce, we throw our hands up, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what it's, and we just let our spouse figure it out for us, or we just don't take ownership. And we don't realize that from an energy perspective, our minds are really powerful. You create exactly what you think, what you believe. You have that life. Think about your mindset. Is your mindset, oh, I can't afford that, so let me guess. You have an entire life of I can't afford, so you don't afford anything. So you are living a life of lack versus I'm going to figure out how I can afford this. And here's the maneuvering that I'm going to do. And that's the life I'm going to create for myself. I got everything I wanted in my divorce, everything. And my lawyer thought I was crazy. I mean, she legit thought I was crazy. And I was like, just watch, because my mindset is stronger than his. It moves mountains. And I know that this is what's going to happen. And that's what I teach, because it's so much more than just listening to a podcast, reading a book. You've got to put it into action with someone holding you accountable along the way. And that's a lot of what the missing pieces are, is that when you don't have somebody by your side, you just default back because we get tired. Oh, never mind. It's not working, and it does work. It takes the right leadership.
Well, you said too, a lot of really important things. I just wanted to reiterate what you said about if somebody's in a place where they are stuck, or they are stuck in the same way of thinking of either lack, or I am a victim of my circumstances, or my life is not the way I want it because of someone else. Mm-hmm. I think the best question to ask is it working for you?
Yes.
Am I fine with that? Am I happy? Am I creating really what I want for my life? And if you really answer that truthfully, then you will say, no, it's not. And then there is another way. And what you're saying is also so smart. How do you make changes, lasting change? One of them is to have a partner of some sort, a coach, a best friend, an aunt, somebody who can keep you accountable for your new decisions, new ways of thinking. It takes time. Takes commitment. It takes repetition.
Yeah.
Marissa Peer always says, yeah.
I was going to say, think about when we all learned to first ride a bike, right? Think about when you had a baby. I remember coming home from the hospital with my now 16-year-old, looking at my husband and going, okay, now what do we do with this? Like, what am I supposed to do with this child, right? Like, sure, I read books, but then when you're in it, you're like, how do I do this? Like, the books aren't landing. What do I do? I know how to change a diaper now, but like, what if it cries? What if it this? What if it doesn't sleep? Oh my God, I'm never going to sleep again. Like, it's
same.
We've all been through this already, but yet for some reason, when we go through divorce, it paralyzes us and we just stay in either inaction or fear. And really, fear is what keeps us paralyzed. It's what keeps us, stuck. And so it's really about, what I say the opposite of fear is, yes, it's love, but it's really confidence.
Mm.
And if you were confident, then fear wouldn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean, let me rephrase that actually. When you are confident, fear feels less scary. It feels uncomfortable. And there's a difference between discomfort and fear and like paralyzed, terrified, not going to do anything, right? Because as you know, Karen, I mean, you've transformed as well. And you know that with every shift, with every thing you've been through that's uncomfortable, you know that there's growth on the other side. And so I think that we don't see divorce as an opportunity for growth. We see it as an opportunity to really judge ourselves and to see how unworthy we are, or to call ourselves a failure. And that's the opposite of what this experience is, I believe, meant to teach us. You know, I thank my ex-husband all the time. Thank you for doing this. Thank you that I'm not married to you. You know, we were talking actually even during the holidays, and, you know, I was joking around with him about something, and he, you know, and he made a comment. He's like, well, you're the way you are now, which was this was a compliment, but he's like, you know, you are who you are today because of everything that you and I have been through. And he's like, aren't you like so happy? And I was like, oh my God, I'm like the happiest I think I've ever been. Like, yes, I would go through it all again. That's
Wow.
what I want for my clients. That's what I want for the world, because sometimes it takes the universe hitting us over the head with a 2x4 unexpectedly from behind, you know, when we're already down, to wake us up. And again, like, I wouldn't trade my life for anything. And, you know, the other thing too is that I have my boys, right? I say that they are the love and everything good that was James and I. And I would never trade that for anything in this world. You know, no matter how much hurt we've been through, you know, he's the one that has to live with what he did, just like I have to live with what I did. And I've chosen to make lemonade out of lemons from what I've learned. I can't take responsibility or, you know, have any ownership over what he's doing with what he's done. But for me, you know, that was a part of my past. And without that, I wouldn't be where I am today.
And you never stop growing. And I love how you said the growth is really, the happiness is on the other side of the growth, which is uncomfortable. And you can describe that as painful, or you can just actually shift the mindset to, I want the life that I had envisioned when I first married my first husband. What I envisioned is not what it ended up to be.
Correct.
You can create a life that you did envision, that you had wanted all along.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a blessing to go through the hell, and that's the only way to grow. I just wanted to reaffirm that and say that again, because it's so important. Yeah. It's only on the other side. So what I see, and what I think what I want to talk about next is your clients and how you've helped them to get from depression, fear, anger, blame, and shame to, how do you get to, I'm going to take responsibility? Why is it so hard for people? How do you get there? How do you get from, I hate him, he ruined my life, to, you know, I'm paraphrasing. I'm in general, we all have different experiences, right?
Yes.
I am going to take responsibility. One of those is that I want my life to be different. You have to decide that I want it. But how do you get to the place where you want the growth? I want the growth. I want the life on the other side. How do you get to that?
Yeah, you know, I think that everybody gets there at some point. I think everybody's, you know, their path is very, very different. I know that for my clientele, the path is that I'm done trying to do it by myself. Just give me the roadmap and tell me what it is that I'm supposed to do, because I can't take it anymore. You know, and that was very much me. I was reading books. I was listening to podcasts. I was attending every free anything I could get my hands on. I was in therapy. I was, you know, I was desperate to do anything. And the problem was that the things that I was doing to what we were talking about before, is that there wasn't any accountability. And we are our own worst accountability partners. We make excuses. Oh, we'll get to that tomorrow. Oh, I'm really tired tonight. It's the same reason why we don't exercise, right? We make excuses. It's no different.
100%.
And what I ended up realizing was that, I mean, number one, I attract clients who are me, right? Who were me at some point in my divorce emotional downward spiral. And the type of woman who comes to me is somebody who really is like, I'm done trying to do this by myself. And I'm ready to just, I don't care what it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. Get me out of this, because, work is suffering. My relationship with my kids is suffering. I'm miserable. Like, I want to find love. So that is why I created my 5-step proprietary methodology, because they are the same 5 steps that I took to get myself from, this place of pain to hope and peace and freedom and ease and joy and love. And so rehab is actually an acronym. So the steps are, the R is about reclaiming your identity and your voice. So really figuring out who it is that you are, not your ego, right? Because our egos want to be right all the time. No, I want to know who it is that you are, who is underneath, what makes you tick. And that part, step number 1 with the R, which is reclaiming your identity and voice. What's so important about that is that you're going to realize that it's the piece of you that is still buried deep inside, but she's still there. And so we're going to rediscover who she is in that R process. The E is all about ending your victim mindset, which I also coined, the phrase of like, it's time to end your pity party, stop giving out the invitations and throwing the rager every weekend. It's time to take ownership. And that's where we really confront really what your biggest fears are, what it is that those inner negative voices are saying to you that are just not true, and teaching you how to break down truth from fiction. And then we move into the H, which is all about healing your wounds. Like you said, I think divorce is harder than death, because to your point that you made in the beginning of the podcast episode is that, they're really, usually you have nothing to do with it, right? And the other side of it too is that you're mourning all these other aspects of your marriage. So losing your best friend, losing your marriage, your sense of family, financial security, dreams, retirement, travel. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And all of a sudden, your entire life, I describe it as like the rug being pulled out from underneath you. So with the healing of the wounds, it's really about understanding and learning how it is that you now get to take care of yourself as you're navigating and feeling through all these emotions. So the core of that is self-care. Now, we tend to be the last people that we take care of. Everybody else comes first, and we love to be people pleasers. So this part is really about undoing the people pleasing, undoing the need for external validation, and really rooting yourself in what is self-care for you? How do you start to do that for yourself? Because that in turn is going to raise your self-esteem. It's going to it's going to raise your confidence. It's going to raise your worth that you see yourself having. And so that then gets us into the A, which is all about acceptance and accountability. So once we know how to nurture ourselves, it's like, okay, now I'm in a place where I can really look back and say, how did I show up? Because marriage takes 2 people, and you have to own 100% of your 50. So while my husband cheated, he's got to deal with all of that. That is not my cup of tea. But what I have to own is how I showed up, how I talked to him, how I created a disconnect between the 2 of us. And it's how I showed up. So really getting into learning how to have self-compassion for myself, to practice mindfulness, which is a 3-step process in and of itself. And so through that, you then get to the B, which is building your foundation, which to me is rooted in self-forgiveness. And that is the heart, I think, because I know it was for me, the forgiveness piece was really hard. And until I learned what that looked like and what that meant, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I actually teach self-forgiveness differently than I've ever seen it out there. So the way that I like to help my clients through that process is we actually spend the most time on the forgiveness piece, because I do believe that it is multifaceted, and it goes back to not just your marriage, but to your childhood. And so we do some inner work and digging with that. And that's where my spiritual training comes into play, and why when I teach forgiveness, it's a little bit different. So at the end of the day, what my program does is it really brings together, it's mind, body, spirit, and energy, because your energy is really ultimately that foundation by which your next life gets to be created from.
I love all of that. I do agree. Well, that was my experience too, was forgiveness was the hardest part.
Yes.
Self confidence was, it's all wrapped into it's all, together, but that was so hard for me. And since you brought up the childhood, I have, done a lot of therapy and a lot of reading and a lot of all of the things that you're talking about that really helped me a lot. I wish I had known you when I went through my divorce, because I didn't know about you, and I don't think you had started your business. When did you start your business?
I started my business back in 2018.
Yeah, I got a divorce in 08.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I wish I could.
I wish I had me too. That's why I did this.
Right. And for anybody who is thinking about having a passion for doing something to help somebody, I love that, because everybody out there is the perfect person to help the version of yourself that you used to be. Yes. You were put on this planet. One of the reasons is to help people go through this process, because it's so difficult and so challenging, and it's brilliant. It's beautiful, and everybody can do that. But I want to just talk about the childhood piece of it just quickly.
Let's do it.
I'm right now, I'm actually reading How to Get the Love You Want, or Getting the Love You Want. And it's brilliant. I love it. I'm reading it with my husband. And my question is, what does childhood trauma or unhealed childhood experiences, or unhealed childhood, what you haven't forgiven, like you're saying, it's part of the forgiveness process. What does that have to do with your relationship and then future relationships?
Yeah. So the way that I coach around this and the way that I work with my clients is, so I am a certified theta healer. And what theta healing is all about is it's about shifting belief systems that we have either had passed down to us or that we grew up with. So the part of the childhood trauma that I work with my clients around are beliefs that they grew up with and then brought into their marriage. So for example, for me, very close to my family. However, I grew up in a home where I was the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors on both sides of my family, first generation born here in America. So what I ended up figuring out and learning through my theta healing that I did with my theta healer, and is why I became, and got trained, is I ended up figuring out that I had been taught that I was supposed to blend in, because when you stand out, that's a bad thing, right? Standing out is a negative thing.
You could die.
Correct.
Back then, of course, it's not
back
true
then.
now.
Exactly. So it was like, and then coming to America, well, we had to fit in, we had to be like Americans. So calm yourself. And for anybody that, knows me, like I was not born to blend in like this. I am not somebody who is meant to just be a wallflower. And so it was very hard for me growing up, because I was like, but wait a second, like I have a lot to say. And I was silenced as a little girl, because it was like, just sit and be quiet. I lived into a very feminine or I was taught to live into a very feminine role, like sit, look pretty, cross your legs, smile, nod, do what your husband says to do, all this stuff. And my whole life, I felt like I was like fighting against myself, but I was told that if I didn't play with, if I didn't go along with what my family expected of me, that I was going to be disowned. I mean, that was literally the interpretation that I had. And so my whole life, I did what was expected of me, right? I'm Jewish. I was supposed to marry a doctor or a lawyer. My sister married the doctor. I married the lawyer. I raised my kids Jewish. It's like I did everything that was expected of me because I had all these fears instilled in me from a young child, but beliefs that supported these fears. And so what I learned from what I do as a theta healer is how to really uncover what those deep-seated beliefs were. I also have money stories. I uncovered all these, God, so many things that played out in my marriage that it was eye-opening to me because, again, with the power of energy and with healing and awareness, you can shift anything. And so I started recognizing these beliefs, while they may have served my ancestors, it didn't serve me. It wasn't going to serve my children moving forward. And that wasn't what I wanted them to move forward with. And so really retraining myself and relearning what my new beliefs were in a way that they served, right? So me standing out was no longer a negative. It was reframing it in the positive. Or, me being told, to keep my mouth shut because my opinion differed from other people's turned into, well, you are allowed to have a voice and to be heard, but there's a way to be heard and a way to be not heard, right? So that's how I help my clients with their childhood trauma. A lot of my clients similarly have mom or dad issues that we've grown up with, that we bring into our marriage, that really divorce exposes, and in a good way that allows us to say, like, wait, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want my kids to be like this anymore. And what's so powerful about this work is that it passes on to future generations. So the work I do with my clients isn't just for my clients. It's for them and their kids and all their future generations. Like we have this beautiful opportunity to change the script for our children and for our children's children, and to end cycles that we were brought on to that no longer serve. And so that's the part that really makes me excited, is to see these generational shifts that happen with my clients. And then you start seeing how your kids shift. And that's when I really knew that what I was doing was working, because, everything I've done for myself, I've done for my children, and my kids are freaking amazing. Like, they are amazing human beings. I lead, right? I'm a leader. So I lead by example and they follow, and they're creating amazing lives for themselves. So I always remind people that, like, when you do this work, it's not just for you, it's for your kids too.
That's beautiful. And I'm just smiling from ear to ear because I love everything you're saying. And I loved reframing it to your situation, your tragedies, your breakups, your divorces, the shit that happens to you in your life. You could literally change everything if you had the awareness that your beliefs aren't necessarily yours. So figure out where they came from. They came from someone else, and if they serve you or not. And B, an incredible opportunity to break the cycle, whatever cycle it is. Yep. Even if you have wonderful parents, you still inherit their beliefs that may not serve you. They served them. It kept them alive. It allowed them believing that way, maybe is the only reason why they made it out and they made it to America.
Correct.
And now 100%. And that's beautiful. And that's wonderful. And now, are those beliefs really mine? And really getting to that awareness. I believe this. Is it really my belief? And is it serving you?
Right.
Wouldn't you agree? That's where you start. Is that where you start? That awareness?
100%.
Then you can transform and break the cycle. And I love reminding us moms out there listening that the work we do on ourselves is for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. You are blessing them with more opportunities to create the lives that they want as well. You have to be that example.
Exactly.
100%.
That's
so brilliant. I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited to hear what you're saying and what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And you have a pretty big project that you've been working on. if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it was just a little thing, right?
Just a teeny,
Um,
how did that even come about? Well, tell them what it is.
So I have written a book, and I'm really excited about it coming out because it's been something in the works for a little while. It got a pin put in it because of my mom's illness, but it's coming out. It's coming out on February 12th, and it's called Divorce Sucks, Now What? The 5 Steps to Find Yourself and Heal After Going from I Do to I'm Divorced. And really, the story is rooted in what my experience was. You guys got a taste of it today. I go into a lot more detail around not just my story, but also each one of those 5 steps that I briefly touched on today in the podcast. And also share more about my story with my mom, because my mom's cancer diagnosis and my divorce process went literally, we walked hand in hand. So my mom and I were both dealing with grief at the same time for various reasons. You know, my mom dealing with the grief around obviously her health, and then also she lost a son. I mean, my ex-husband was a son, and me similarly losing my husband and about to lose my mom. And so in the story, it talks a lot about how my mom's will to live had a lot to do with wanting to be here for me. And a lot of how I was able to find strength throughout my divorce was also to give my mom inspiration to fight. And so we really leaned on each other. And it's all about my own metamorphosis, almost literal metamorphosis, and how my divorce really allowed me to come out on the other side in a much stronger way, but also heavily leaned into my faith and the power of the universe, and how my mom's passing, which happened in January of last year, really played a role in that. So yeah, it's going to be available on Amazon, and I'm excited for it to come out.
Me too. And I'm so sorry about your mother's passing. And
Thank you.
thank you for being so vulnerable and writing the book to help all of us. Can't wait to get it. Make sure you get it. Divorce Sucks, Now What? On February 12th. And I'm going to release this podcast that week too. So we'll be talking about it, and I hope everybody gets it. When did you start writing a book? I just want to talk about the actual process of writing for anybody who is actually thinking about writing a book.
Yeah, more, overlap with my mom. So I actually started writing it. So funny how my mom's so intertwined with everything. I started writing it in September of 2020. Oh my God, what year are we in? 2023. My mom died 2022. So I started writing it in September of 2021. And I literally went away for the weekend to start writing it. And that weekend is when my mom's cancer this is like 4 years later, that was her decline that she wasn't going to come back from. And so I tried to write it during that time, and it just wasn't coming from a good place. And the last time that I had written the book was actually right before, like the day before she passed away. And I just couldn't bring myself back to it. And at the time, it didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel organic to who I had become. So when I picked it back up, I actually hired a brand new editor to work with, because the other one it wasn't working for me at that time. And she helped me to really get clear on what I wanted the book to say and what I wanted it to be about, and to also get really clear on how the book aligned with my mom. And the last piece that I'll say about that was because of the overlap with my mom and I, writing the book became very easy because she sent me a message. So I went to Sedona to write it. I wrote it in 5 days, and I went there and my mom sent me a message, and it opened everything for me. It just opened the floodgates for me to get this book out. And what it showed to me was that my mom's passing was timed in a way where she's able to support me being where she is now, more so than she could when she was here on this earth. And my mom is, I just got goosebumps. And my mom is so in this book with me that part of it feels like she wrote it with me. The book is dedicated to her. And the best thing I can say is that, make sure that if a book is in you, let it come from your heart. Don't let it come from your head, because people don't want to read things necessarily that come from your head. They want to feel your heart, especially as it relates to divorce. And I think that was a big reason why this was so important to me, was because most of the divorce books I read are, psychoanalysis and psychology and all this stuff. And it's great and it's educational, but I believe that the greatest lessons learned are those that are through experiences. And so that's really what this book is intended to be about, is to share through my experiences what it was that I learned and why I've created my program and my business the way that I have.
Do you mind sharing what that message was?
My mom's message to me was, so I watched my mom pass. I was in the room. I watched her take her last breath. It was just me. And for months, I felt like it was a burden. And my dad was having a really hard time. And so I wasn't really able to kind of process what was going on for me around that until I went to Sedona. And my mom came to me. She comes to me in the form of butterflies. And that's when she comes and speaks to me. And when I was at the top of one of the vortexes in Sedona, she came and spoke to me. And she said she picked me, that she passed on purpose with me because she knew that I was going to be the only one to help her actually do it. And that changed the entire narrative for me, that it was a blessing. I was chosen, right? I was the chosen one. And that whole lesson, like, that's what I teach, right? It's not about the glass half empty. It's about the glass half full. And in that moment, my mom got me to understand why it was that it was me, and shifting that entire perspective of that experience changed everything for me, everything, the grief, the shame, all of that as it related. Cause until you've seen somebody pass away, I don't think you quite understand what that experience is like. It is, I can't even describe, I didn't even know what I was walking into. It was highly traumatic for me, but everything changed as soon as I shifted my perspective about the experience. And it was the same thing with my divorce. As soon as I shifted my perspective on that, everything changed. As soon as I shifted my perspective on my mom dying in front of me in a room by ourselves, everything changed for me. And so a lot of that is interwoven, right? It's intertwined into all the chapters of the book, because there's so many places that all of us can start looking at things differently. And instead of putting polarity on a situation, what if it was just neutral? And imagine how much of,
instead of, oh, this is a good thing that happened and this is bad.
exactly.
Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
And it's beautiful. And I'm so happy that you were here to share and help us and help those who are struggling through divorce. How do they find you?
The best place to find me, honestly, is, I know you mentioned my podcast at the top. Everywhere on social media, my handle is Divorce Rehab with Wendy. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you can find my podcast on there as well. I have a Facebook group. You guys should check it out, the Divorce Rehab, my website, wendysterling.net, where I've got great free resources. And I have a fun quiz on there that you guys can answer some questions and find out what your true superpower is on the other side of divorce based on the answers. It's a fun quiz. And yeah, that's how everyone can find me.
Well, everybody must find her. Thank you, Wendy. Go buy her book, Divorce Sucks.
you.
Now What? Wendy Sterling. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you today.
Of course, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.